Hello, you're very welcome along to the Matchbook NFL podcast. It's week 3. Hard to believe we're already at week 3 in the NFL. Delighted to welcome the regular team of Sam Farley, Judah Fortgang, Andrew Dinsick to the podcast. Guys, plenty of talking points from the NFL. So very quickly, before we get into week 2 takeaways, and we were going to go straight to Sam on this one. Before we get going, another competition on the YouTube channel. Just comment on the YouTube live stream. Even if you're listening on the podcast, head over to the YouTube channel. Comment your best bet for week 3 or any questions for the guys. Whatever you want to comment, and you'll be entered into a draw to win a £50 free bet on Matchbook. So do check that out on the YouTube channel and hit that like button and subscribe completely for free. Best way to keep up to date with all the guys, not just NFL, but football and, of course, horse racing as well. So, yes, Sam, straight to you on this one with week 2 takeaways. Nick Chubb, talk to me. I'm a Nick Chubb fantasy owner. Thoughts and condolences with everyone listening who is as well. And I unfortunately didn't get forward in the waiver report either. So it's been a bad couple of days.
Yeah, I mean, we don't like to see injuries anyway, but that one in particular, the fact they didn't replay it, that's always a sign. But like an idiot, I searched it out and it was genuinely ruined my day. I couldn't stop thinking about it at various points in the day. And it's so sad to see. I'm not a doctor. I'm not going to comment on whether he's going to come back or anything like that. But I mean, that's just heartbreaking for him, heartbreaking for the team, especially when they look at their quarterback and it's Deshaun Watson, and they look over at Tampa Bay and Baker Mayfield somehow looks quite good. It's a terrible time for Browns fans.
Yeah, for terrible couple of weeks. But yeah, look, on that with running backs, particularly, with contract wise and stuff like that, it's always tough to see a running back. They put their bodies on the line for the league and our entertainment, and to see that injury is probably as bad as it gets, in fairness, like you're saying, Sam. So thoughts, of course, with him. Judah, heading over to you, and this is picking up a little bit of a point that Drew was talking from week 1 in terms of the NFC versus the AFC, I guess, overall. The best teams last year all of a sudden don't look quite as strong this year, and it's looking like there's some NFC teams that could potentially be winning the Super Bowl this year.
Yeah, I think when you kind of take a macro view, or even just thinking where we were a couple of weeks ago, it was like, okay, the AFC is absolutely stacked. There are so many teams that can, come out of there. And you look now, and there are flaws for every team. I mean, the Bills look a little more, granted they had a solid week 2 against a porous Raiders defense, but they look a little more like the second half 2022 team rather than the dominant one from the first half. The Chiefs offense has not been the same. Granted, that's the one I probably have the most confidence that they'll bounce back. The Jaguars offense has not been particularly good, and it's not as if they're going up against, world beater defenses. The Dolphins look great, but they did still give up 34 points to the Chargers, and Tua's health is a remaining concern. You look across, and the Bengals, obviously, Joe Burrow does not look healthy. It just seems like the juggernauts we thought would kind of emerge from the AFC all have question marks. And in the NFC, I mean, the 49ers look like an absolute house. I mean, granted, unless everyone gets hurt, the team is just so deep. And the quarterback, I mean, Brock Purdy hasn't even been playing particularly well, and yet they're still absolutely dominating. The Cowboys, I think, a lot of these kind of game scripts have elevated their play, but they absolutely look like a real contender. And maybe, those teams are actually the better ones. But I think it's just a general point about we had some really dominant teams last year. I mean, the Eagles basically just walked to the Super Bowl. They've shown some major holes. Their pass defense has been atrocious. Even their passing offense hasn't been particularly good. They basically just have to kind of lean on the run. There are a lot of holes for some of the big teams, and I think that's going to lead to some surprising upsets. And just, otherwise, even the Cardinals, who we thought would be absolutely terrible, and you almost have to put the tank variable because they're so bad. They've been competitive in each of their games. They're not just going to lose by 2 scores every week. I think there's going to be kind of a lot of pricing in of certainty of how good teams are and how bad teams are, and I think it's actually a lot closer to the middle, which will be something I'll be looking to capitalize on in the coming weeks.
Yeah, just even you mentioned the 49ers, they are now favorites for the Super Bowl on Matchbook, 7.4 ahead of the Chiefs at 7.8. Drew, over to you, and Judah touched on this quarterback health, specifically Joe Burrow, which we'll be getting into a lot in the podcast, but it's definitely not helping offenses find their early footing in the first few weeks of the season, which is, of course, is crucial if you want to make a playoff run towards the end of the season.
Yeah, I mean, by my count, half the quarterbacks in the league are either dealing with just ineffectiveness or some sort of injury that has taken them out for a meaningful stretch of time, like Aaron Rodgers, or just an uncertain, sense of will they be available and how effective will they be. In the case of the Burrow, Anthony Richardson, even Jalen Hurts dealing with potential, kind of surprised here, but dealing with the same shoulder injury that affected him to the end of last season is wild. And then you have a number of, kind of the young and inexperienced offensive coordinators trying to find their footing. You combine these two, and I think we're headed for another 2 pretty chaotic weeks here. I think the results are going to be pretty surprising, and I am leaning towards just trying to identify dogs that I think have a realistic chance to put together a clean performance defensively. It feels like defense right now, you can look across the league and tell pretty clearly, like, these guys are good, these guys are good, these guys are healthy, these guys are healthy. Whereas offense is just going to be a little bit of a crapshoot here now until we get into maybe even October, maybe even November. So I think, this is the opportunity to try to swing for some more high variance stuff. I don't think that realistically any game, there are probably people who look at last week's results and they're like, man, what a great week for teasers. Oh, these lines are all tight. Like, oh, the market's already efficient. Like, let's tease. I would almost feel like the next couple of weeks are going to potentially show you some weird, wild, difficult to process results. And, I think that in general, there is still a lot to be sorted out in terms of who's ultimately even going to be in the playoff mix in the AFC. You're seeing stuff like Tua at the top of the MVP market, which is unbelievable to me. I mean, is he the MVP through 2 weeks? Okay, fine. The idea that he's going to stay, healthy for 17 games is something that we've never seen. And I think it's a huge question mark about his, candidacy. And, so I'm inclined to try to take some swings against some of the AFC teams that have performed well so far, even though that list is like 1. And it's the Dolphins. The NFC, on the other hand, as long as this Cowboys defense is healthy, like, best of luck scoring 20 points on them. And as long as the Niners offense stays healthy, I think that's your class offense in the NFC. So, Niners, Cowboys, I'm ready for it. We're going to get a preview of that early in the season. I just hope that those two teams make it to the end of the season healthy.
Yeah, all of a sudden we're all watching the NFC for the Super Bowl. Complete opposite to last year, but yeah, fascinating. The guys have set that up quite that well. We're going to go to Sam for some Chargers at Vikings. The 4 games, incidentally, we're covering Chargers at Vikings, Broncos at Dolphins, Steelers at Raiders, Rams at Bengals. Unfortunately, Drew gave us a heads up on the week 3 matchups not being particularly good, and unfortunately, there's none of the standout fixtures, but we're going to try and drum up as best interest as we can. And we will start with the Chargers at Vikings, the 0-2 6 o'clock showdown UK time. Chargers 202 on the money line, Vikings 189. The point spread gives Chargers a 1 point head start at 195, and the total for this is 54.5, shaded a little bit towards the under. And that's where you're looking, Sam, but a little bit on the Chargers. Who'd have thought after 2 weeks they are now 44.0 in the Super Bowl outright market? As a Chargers fan myself, it's pretty heartbreaking stuff what's going on. Head coach under massive pressure. What are your takeaways from them over the 2 weeks, and can they respond and get some sort of potential run to the playoffs going this year?
I mean, they're a team, if you remember going back to our first week, I was kind of really high on them this season, and I still think there's something there, and I don't think they're as good as perhaps my initial thoughts were, but I still think this is a team that could improve throughout the season, and come playoff time, if they're fortunate enough to be in a position to reach the playoffs, they might be able to do some damage potentially. But it's really concerning. Defensively, I don't think they've been particularly great. But this game in particular, I think the Chargers probably just about squeak it out, maybe a 25, 23, 28, 24, something like that. But I'm going for the under. It's 54.5. Really high. It's just risen and risen. It started at 51.5, and I think sometimes when everyone's zigging, you've got to zag and go back the other way. Ultimately, Chargers, we have seen them score a lot of points this year. The Vikings did last weekend, but not particularly against Tampa Bay. And I just look at these teams, and the high points total scores me. I think the Chargers probably will get a reasonable amount of points on the board. Josh Kelly was pretty ineffective last week, like 3 yards per carry, I think. And it looks like Austin Eckler should be back, which huge upgrade. But I just do not trust the Vikings to be putting up points. I find them such a confusing team in so many ways. So I have to take the under here. I don't feel great about it, but I do think that kind of watching this game, I think it's going to be a bit slower, at least in that first half potentially, than many people would suggest.
Okay, yeah, under 54.5 as I touched on. Currently 192 to play for Sam on that one. Lock that in as the first bet of the podcast. Drew, over to you. I'm just going to read your notes here. Holding my nose and going back to the well with the Chargers. I'm in the same boat, both fan-wise, but I also feel we're playing quite well in a lot of aspects, particularly on the offense. It's just Staley, man. He just keeps making these insane plays and calls, I guess. Oh.
Shame on me if I continue to bet money on Brandon Staley teams and he continues to burn me to the ground. But I'm going to go back to the well here. Sam's kind of, I don't really know what to do with these games. I'm not really confident in any of these sides. I mean, like, that's kind of the way I feel about most of this board right now. And, granted, I'm not picking sides well in the NFL right now. And when you're not picking well, you're second guessing yourself and stuff like that. So maybe that's part of my indecision in I hold my nose instead of just saying, hey, look, the Chargers and Kellen Moore for what it's worth. And I know that the scheme is different now in Minnesota than it was under the previous regime. But Kellen Moore has always sort of had the keys to really tackle this type of talent unit. And he should be able to, in my opinion, at least unlock these guys to the degree that they get into the 30s. I know that, not having Eckler has been an issue. I'm not expecting Eckler to go. I don't have any inside information that he's available for this one. But I like the way that I like the game plans that Kellen Moore has put together to take on, Vikings talent level that they had last year. And I think that this talent level is lower this year. So Chargers should be able to score in this one. And then the question is, can the Vikings do anything they want against what is weirdly the worst passing defense in the NFL by EPA per play to this point in the season? I mean, I get it. You played Tyreek Hill week 1 and Tua, who was on fire, and you gave up 1 million passing yards week 1, and it's a small sample, only having 2 games, but not, it's just really uninspiring letting the Titans kind of, back into that game and really just, not coming away with any key stops when you needed them towards the end there. And it's tough for me to think that defense and the talent that they have, particularly, at some of those key pieces in the secondary, like Derwin James, step up at any point in time, buddy. We'll happy to see you kind of start making a couple of key plays in these games. And, I think that the run defense is good enough that this becomes a game that is on the arm of Kirk Cousins, and there's a chance that that a lot of the positive variance that we saw the Vikings capture last year it's not happening the same way, and some of that could be trickling into the way that the players feel about it's could be mental in the locker room, in the way that they think like, we're just going to win these close games, and now they have lost 2 of these close games, and it could be that could be a little bit contagious. So that's not necessarily part of my handicap here. I think the fair price should be something more like Chargers -2. I think that swinging away on Chargers -2.5 and getting a little bit better price would be my angle of attack here. But I'm waiting for kind of confirmation that Eckler's not going to go, and I'm hoping to get best price available. So I haven't bet this one yet, but I'm going to have Chargers on my card on Sunday.
Okay, yeah, one to watch on Sunday, potentially on Eckler being out. Chargers currently that price -2.5 is around 2.14. So that one to watch. Judah, you're looking at a live bet again, so kind of give us the thinking with both teams here at the moment. But we touched on a lot of it, I guess, mainly with Chargers points, but maybe a little bit on the Vikings.
Yeah. In some ways, I would say this game is like the opposite of my macro view, which is like we're pretty certain we know things about each of these teams, which is like the Vikings with Kirk Cousins have been the same offense every single year. They're consistently good. Like maybe a slightly better now with Kevin O'Connell. They're actually number 1 by my offensive numbers. They've been certainly unlucky with turnovers, and I think that the game script last week kind of tilted to their strengths. Conversely, like we know the Chargers' pass defense is bad, or their defense is atrocious. It's been this way for 2 years. All early signs point to this being true for a 3rd straight season. And we know the Chargers' offense is good and the Vikings' defense is not. Right? We know basically as much as we'll ever know things about the NFL, we know a lot about these 2 teams. And where that's relevant is each of these teams also has a particular tendency. Say when the Vikings go up, They become one of the worst offenses in NFL history. We've seen this every single year of the Kirk Cousins era. This team playing with a lead is dreadful, and the Chargers are really good coming back. This is equally true in the reverse, where the Chargers, how many times have we seen them blow huge leads? This is backed up by the data, and the Vikings are one of the best teams coming back. So I like playing this as, these are two great offenses. Actually, I think great in the context of the 2023 NFL, especially when we're seeing a lot of, as Drew talked about, a lot of this quarterback uncertainty. And we're going to see one of these teams build up a lead. It would be thoroughly unsurprising to see them kind of come back, and I'm going to want to play that volatility, try and take each side when they're down. And I don't know how this game's going to end up. The market's certainly pricing it as a toss-up. I think it's going to come down to the last drive, and I'm just going to want to play that volatility on each side, knowing the team tendencies and knowing how good both these offenses are.
I can say with sincerity that Chargers with a 2-score lead is a live bet on the Vikings in my book every single time.
Yeah. I'm glad Judah touched on that the data backs up that Chargers blow leads consistently, which is good because that's how I feel every week watching them. But look, we'll see how we get on. Drew potentially looking at the bet of pre-game, depending on the Eckler injury, if you can get a bit more juice of -2.5. Currently 2.14, but under 54.5 the selection for Sam at 1.92.
Yeah, just real quick, I kind of caught by surprise that you have Vikings number one. Even if you strip out their turnovers, some of their rushing metrics have been horrific overall. Is it number one just in terms of like negative game state they're the best offense, or is there something that I'm missing looking at the data so far?
I think it's particularly because they basically, the game scripts have forced them to pass, and they're really good at passing. Like if you break it up by like pass drives versus run drives, they're really bad on run drives, but terrific passing. And that's just kind of like, the issue with any 2-game sample is you're going to kind of have like, okay, they played in these weird game scripts and they were awesome on Thursday night, and that's a lot of the data. I'm not buying that they're the number one offense, but I am buying that like they're consistently going to be top 10 as they've been every year.
Okay, we will move on. Fascinating game in store, 6 o'clock in the early window. And we will go to the second game we're covering in the early window, Broncos at Dolphins. We'll take a look at the betting that we currently have on Matchbook.com. The money line sees Broncos at 3.3, Dolphins 1.4. The point spread gives Broncos a 6-point head start. And the total for this is 48, favoring the over slightly at 193. So, Drew, on this one, you're looking at overs on this. A little bit on that Hail Mary. I mean, like I was sort of, for those in the UK and Ireland understand this, the time with the Commanders Broncos was the last game on Red Zone. It's getting very late. I was only half watching and kind of turned it off. And then I sort of saw on Twitter the Hail Mary that almost brought it to overtime, had that pass interference being called on the Broncos. So I'm getting a long way of saying the Broncos scored a lot of points. It was a dramatic game against the Commanders. And I guess you're feeling that they've enough here to hit this over alongside the Dolphins.
Yeah, I think I've seen enough through 2 weeks to know that the Sean Payton effect in terms of just conceptual framework for how to come up with a game plan for a given team looks to be effective. And if, there's obviously plenty of familiarity with, what he would want to do to take on a Vic Fangio style defense, let alone Vic Fangio himself, let alone with this, with these players. And I think looking for an over in this game is basically just saying that the Broncos can get to 20 points. I think the flip side of the coin, expecting that the Dolphins will continue their offensive efficiency is perfectly fine assumption to make. I think downgrading the Broncos defense relative to what was expected coming into the season is a reasonable place to be at right now. I don't exactly know what has slipped so much. Maybe the Ajero Evero effect was greater than any of us really kind of could have wrapped our head around. But for whatever the case is, they're not playing discipline. They're not playing, the same quality that you saw from them last year when they were holding teams into the teens. And while 48 in today's NFL seems like an absolutely ridiculously high total, maybe it's still, I think, is expecting something like 28 to 21, 20 to 20, 27, 21, I guess is probably the actual median projection. But this is basically a bet that the speed that the Dolphins bring and the fact that they have 2 weapons to work with, and the Broncos really only have Pat Surtain right now, who's playing at a relatively high quality level, and that there's not really much not much pass rush to speak of, and that even the running defense that the Broncos have out there has been surprisingly poor. I think so. I think basically you're looking at a hair underrated Broncos offense right now and a hair overrated Broncos defense by market, which is leading me to want to get involved in an over instead of just playing the Dolphins at 6.5.
Okay, so locked in over 48 for Drew. And Sam, you are going to take the chance on the Dolphins -6. I guess you haven't been overly impressed with the Russell Wilson show over the last couple of weeks.
No, not really, to be honest with you. I think we knew, well, we had an idea of what we thought the Dolphins would be coming into the year. Were we really particularly believing that Russell Wilson was kind of going to revert back to the Russ we saw a couple of years ago in Seattle? And I just don't think it's going to happen. And I look at this team and like Drew said, defensively, they are not what we thought they'd be. I think in terms of DVOA, defensive DVOA, they're fairly near the bottom, I think around 30, 29. I can't remember off the top of my head. This is not a team I particularly rate defensively, and they're up against an offense here that could just tear strips off anybody. We've seen that now. And I think what really impressed me most about the Dolphins was we obviously knew that they have incredible pass catchers. We knew about Tua's accuracy. But one thing that really kind of leapt out was Raheem Mostert. I can't even speak today. 121 yards, 18 carries, 2 touchdowns. I thought just this ability to kind of tear you apart, whether that's through the air, along the ground, however they're going to do it, they're going to find a way. And I think this is going to be a really route, to be honest. So I'm taking Dolphins -6. There's Dolphins -8 available. I'm taking that. And if the opportunity for some bigger numbers come, maybe slightly into double digits, I'll take that as well. So I think we're looking at a team here that, I mean, they're averaging 30 points per game. I just don't see them not routing the Broncos, to be honest.
Okay, yeah, home advantage, of course, as well. So Dolphins -6, currently 1.95 and -8.5 on alternative line, as Sam mentioned, 2.36. Judah, I'm fascinated with your bet here, so take away on that. But for very quickly, I know Drew touched on his injury at the top. Is that a concern for you as a Dolphins supporter, I guess? You have been picking them for the last couple of weeks. I know he's like one concussion away from an injury, but how likely is that throughout maybe 15 weeks? Can he, as long as he's getting the passes away, surely he can stay relatively injury-free and maybe get a run in the playoffs?
Yeah, I think I'm kind of, if you're taking a long-term view, I'm a little bit skeptical, but like I'm going to work under the assumption that he is fully healthy. And also he's been hit like 4 times this year. They're making a conscious effort of him to get the ball out quick and deep. We highlighted this last week in our matchup. I will say, kind of taking a view of this game, I don't know, I was definitely as bearish as could be on the Broncos defense. I bet the Raiders in week 1. Actually, last week was a little bit of a horror story for me. I'm a big same game parlay guy. I had a 55-1 Sam Howell 300 yards and Washington -5.5. Sam Howell finished with 299, and Washington give up the Hail Mary. So that's a little bit of a tough spot for me. The injury concern here is I think Jalen Waddle's in the concussion protocol. I haven't heard much talk about that at this point in time. It's anyone's guess whether he will clear or not. But where I'm going to go with this bet is taking the first half over. If you kind of look at what I like to define as scripted plays versus non-scripted plays, those are roughly about drives that have about the first 15 plays. That's kind of mostly a guesstimate, but I think can kind of arrive at some truth. And these are the 2 best offenses by a wide margin. The Broncos are, by my metric, which is essentially trying to capture the number of points you earn, how like reproducible and sustainable are those drives. The Broncos are a 6-point offense. I don't think that's going to hold up, but I do think it points to the fact that the Broncos are going to be really good in these spots. And the Dolphins are in second place at about like 4.5. These, like you can kind of see some of this might be signal, some of this might be noise. The fact that it's Sean Payton designing these plays and it's Mike McDaniel designing these plays and everything we know about these coordinators would seem to lend itself to like this being sustainable because these are 2 of the brightest offensive minds. I think this is kind of capturing a little bit of an inefficiency because generally we see that second half prices because there's more passing and teams are coming back. There's generally a slight bias towards the overs there, but I think in this game, particularly because of these teams and how good they are on script, especially both teams are very, very explosive, can score from anywhere on the field and like to do that. I like actually taking the first half over because I do have a lean towards the over, but I think most of that scoring is going to kind of come in the first half, given these team tendencies.
Okay, yeah. So 3 ways of playing this. Judah and Drew under similar lines. Drew taking the over 48 at 193. Judah at the first half total over 22.5. Do shop it around and check out the Matchbook Betting Exchange around Sunday when those markets get really liquid. And Sam locking in Dolphins, both -6 and -8.5. So expecting a big performance again from the Dolphins offense. So big game there. We'll move on to Sunday Night Football. The Steelers at the Raiders. I saw a great stat. Someone was doing the rounds of the amount of times teams have been on Sunday Night Football over the last few years, and Steelers ranked 3rd on that list, which might surprise a lot of people. But I guess they had that following over the last few years. Steelers on the money line again at the Raiders are 2.26. Raiders 1.73. The point spread sees Steelers get +2.5. And the total for this is 43. So, Drew, hand you over to this one. What have you made of for these two teams so far? The Steelers always seem to perform at home. I guess week 1 was probably the exception. They got that back in week 2. But on the road for the first time this season, how do you think they'll get on in Las Vegas?
I mean, Steelers' performances, if you want me to evaluate what we've seen so far, it's been bottom 5, maybe bottom 2 overall. And they've been somewhat fortunate in the way that they've been able to create turnovers and what they've been able to do with those turnovers so that it does not look as bad. Maybe in the box score, they're not 0-2. Obviously, the win against the Browns was gifted. And I think, that there may be some aspects to the way, the defense is playing hard and they're relatively well coached and they're not making, critical, just disciplinary type of mistakes that are costing them these games. I guess maybe that's a factor, but the Steelers are bad right now. And I wanted everything to kind of set up for an opportunity to play them in this spot because I thought there was potentially, a buy low on them having faced 2 of the top 5 defenses in weeks 1 and week 2. But Kenny Pickett does not look like he is right. And I am struggling to kind of, believe that this is the same player that we saw in the preseason who the game was moving much slower for. I am wearing a tinfoil hat saying this, but I think he's possible that he was concussed early in the Niners game and that he's still not necessarily operating at the the level he needs to run this offense, and he's not being helped by his offensive coordinator in Matt Canada, who's running a very predictable scheme. And if they were facing a defense that had a secondary, then I would be concerned that the Steelers were going to get run off the field in this one on the road. But they're not. The Raiders don't necessarily have the talent to go out there and play that same level of defense as the first 2 teams the Steelers has faced. So there is a hair of a buy low whiff here. But Minkah Fitzpatrick dealing with an injury matters. The fact that Cam Hayward, since he's been gone, has been an absolute, just a mess in terms of run stop, run fit, run D. So for those reasons, I think Josh McDaniels is going to come in with a pretty solid script and just, be able to put a little bit of scoreboard pressure on these guys. And then at that point, it's a matter of, is Kenny Pickett right in the head? Is the game going too fast, or is he able to make the reads, make the throws, and, continue to build in his young career? And I'm hopeful that he is able to do that. I think that the total is a hair low, considering the fact that the Steelers defense is not all universe, and that they can be run on so effectively, and that you can come in with the balanced attack and really hurt these guys. And if you had a healthy set of wide receivers for the Raiders, then this would probably be one of my favorite plays of the week, looking at an over in this game. But because it's not, and, the market reflects that to a degree, 43 is a lower total than maybe we would have expected. I still think this should be 44. And I think the only bet is to play to the over. But almost all of the preseason optimism I had that the Steelers were going to be a good regular season team is pretty much gone right now. And the entirety of that evaluation is just Kenny Pickett is not playing well, and not playing well enough to be a long-term starter in the league. And I hope that's because of injury, not because he's literally regressing in year 2. But, we need to continue to collect data on that and see if he can ultimately kind of find his footing, because, we need high-quality quarterback play in the league right now, not what he's got, not what he's doing.
Okay, yeah, over 43, 189 currently. Getting back the over is getting back to the moment as we record on Wednesday afternoon. Sam, over to you, and you do like the Steelers on the money line. Is this more pro Steelers, anti Raiders, a little bit of both? Because as Drew touched on, the Steelers have looked a bit in and out over the first 2 weeks.
Yeah, it is. And Drew mentioned earlier with the Chargers game, he was holding his nose to make the pick. And I think this is very much what I'm doing here. I'm going back to the well one last time. I'm ready to be hurt again. But I look at this team, and in preseason, everything looked so much better. I was thinking we could have a team that kind of really rebound this year. Kenny Pickett might not be terrible. And it has just fallen apart. Offensively, disgraceful, frankly. Just absolutely ridiculous. Was averaging 12 first downs per game, which is, yeah, I mean, you're not going to win many games like that. Very fortunate against the Browns that their defense kind of took advantage of the Browns situation. But for me, the thing that really makes me want to take on the Steelers here is the Raiders defense. I don't think it's particularly good. They're ranked 31st in DVOA. And if there is ever a get back on track game for Kenny Pickett, it's now or never, I think, almost at this point. So for me, I just think I look at the odds and I have to take the Steelers one last time. I will apologize to everybody on next week's show if this is another Steelers defeat.
Okay, 2.26 is the current money line price. Judah, over to you on this one. And you do like the Raiders -2.5. They've been a team that you've been pro on in terms of the individual games for the last couple of weeks, anyway.
Yeah, I think the market. This is continuing to kind of build on that preseason prior of the market discounting this Raiders offense. I don't think this Pittsburgh defense is particularly good, especially when they can't get a pass rush. And believe it or not, by a huge margin, the Las Vegas Raiders have so far the best offensive line in the NFL. If you look at a stat called perfectly blocked passes, essentially that anytime an offensive lineman doesn't mess up, of course, you can have 4 offensive linemen doing their job on one play, but if one messes up, it doesn't really matter how well the other 4 played because that's probably going to end up in a pressure or a sack if one really messes up playing his job. So that's kind of a stat that captures a lot of the offensive line efficiency. The perfect blocked rate is 80%. The highest in the NFL last year was 75%. I don't know if that's going to sustain itself, but at some point we're going to have to kind of realize that this is at least an above average unit, or at least all signs are kind of pointing to that. So if you kind of eliminate TJ Watt and Alex Highsmith, if you're running routes with Jacoby Myers against Levi Wallace and Devontae Adams against Patrick Peterson, that's a huge mismatch. Add in the fact that noisy splits are relatively noisy, but I think we can't ignore that this Steelers run defense has been particularly dreadful without Cam Hayward. The Browns were running all over them last week. The Raiders have not even gotten their ground game going yet. That's something that they were very, very successful with last year. Of course, Josh Jacobs led the league in rushing. I expect them to get a little more of their running back in this spot where the Steelers can't stop the run. I think on the point about the Steelers offense, I don't think they're as bad as the numbers indicate. This is what's going to happen. I think the Browns defense is going to be top 5 this year. The Niners obviously are a house defensively. But I think that the Steelers kind of create a lot of trouble for themselves and won't be able to take advantage of the matchup. They have no one who's even close to average in separation. I mean, Deontay Johnson was like number 1 in ESPN's open score. Losing him was absolutely huge. George Pickens can't separate. Allen Robinson can't separate. These guys are like 25th percentile in their separation numbers. And something else I like to cite is how often you throw it to like open windows versus tight windows. And I think this is more of a scheme thing, but it does kind of correspond to also the lack of separation. And last year we saw that both Kenny Pickett and Mitch Trubisky threw into tight windows about 25% of the time, which is way, way higher than league average. And for a little bit of context, the base rate of an interception on a tight window throw is about 6%, and all other throws is less than 1%. And your success throwing into tight windows is basically non-existent. You need to make kind of that perfect throw that we saw Kenny Pickett make to George Pickens on there's a 3rd down in there. That's like the only way you're going to succeed, and it's with an absolutely perfect throw. All of which is to say we are again seeing the same Matt Canada thing where Kenny Pickett is throwing to tight windows 25% of the time. You can't really run a successful passing offense if you're throwing into tight windows. And I don't think that's a function of the opponents they face. I think it's a function of their offense. That has been true even when we take a larger sample of 17 games. I don't think they're going to be able to take advantage of how bad the Raiders pass defense is because they're shooting themselves in the foot passing. I don't think they're going to be as bad as they've been the past couple weeks, but I don't think they're going to be anything more than an average offense, especially with Deontay Johnson not healthy. Add it all up, and I think the matchup sets up perfectly for the Raiders. Add in the fact that I think that the Raiders at home are probably just a better team at the current moment, and I really, really love this spot.
Okay, Judah going to the well with the Raiders again, -2.5, 191. Sam sticking with the Steelers one last time, money line 2.26, and Drew on the over. So a lot of ways you can go on that game. That is a Sunday night football game, and one of the two Monday night football games, I guess, is the main slot at 1:15. Rams at the Bengals at 1:15 UK time. That is. We'll take a look at the betting. Rams at 216, Bengals 179. Point spread, Rams +2.5. The over is 43.5. We are recording this on Wednesday afternoon. We don't know for sure if Joe Burrow will be playing or not. The injury report was sort of hit and miss, I guess. Or sure, there hasn't been an injury report yet. It'll be tomorrow. But the lack of it and the talk is that it'll be 50-50, maybe a bit less than that. Sam, there's no bet until you learn about Joe Burrow. But talk to us a little bit about the Bengals. And like Judah touched on this and the opening slot, I guess. This team was so good, Bengals, last year. And it just seems the first 2 weeks, the Joe Burrow contract, and maybe it's too easy and simplistic to say, but since that contract, they haven't been good the first 2 weeks.
They haven't, but I think the contract is not really an issue here at all. I think I'm not playing this game because of the Joe Burrow injury and the doubt over whether we're going to see him on Monday. But regardless of that, even if we do see him, he hasn't been the same Joe Burrow. And that, I think, is just a lingering effect of this injury. He's generally not able to use his athleticism to escape the pocket and extend anything. There's so many of the passes he threw to Chase last year. We'd see him kind of getting out, getting Chase getting open, pinging it down there. But ultimately, I think with him and with the Bengals full stop now, if they say he's playing Monday, I'm not going to bet on it. I need to wait now till I see him for at least a whole game, look physically fit and physically healthy and look like he actually trusts his calf to be able to go out there and perform as he did last year. Because although he's not a quarterback that relied on athleticism in the same way that so many others do in the league, it was a kind of key part of his arsenal. And just, I don't know, it worries me a lot with him. So for me, I think the Bengals are just a flat out avoid for probably a couple of weeks almost.
Okay, yeah, maybe see where we are with that. And no action for you either, Drew. Look, I personally have seen this in a lot of other sports in terms of the contract. When a new team or someone gets a big contract, there tends to be that lull over the last couple of weeks. Can you put any of it down to that contract? Is a health? Is a bit of the offense? Everything? I guess it's a bit of everything.
The contract is related, but not in that way. It's related in that I think there was probably incentive on his side after he injured the calf in preseason week 1 or training camp week 1. He didn't play a preseason game, but after that injury, they were obviously well along in contract deals, and I think his camp really pushed hard to make sure that they got the deal done before we saw him on the field trying to play through that injury. And then after he's got the contract in hand, I think it would have been poor optics to sit out the first couple weeks, which is clearly what he needed to do. I don't think if you're telling me Jake Browning couldn't have gone out and given you better quality quarterback play the first 2 weeks than what you've seen from Joe Burrow, then you didn't watch enough Bengals, I guess. It's pretty clear that the calf injury itself is impacting his mechanics, his ability to put power on the ball and follow through and really generate any kind of pop with his legs is non-existent. He re-injures the calf and is hobbling around at the end of the week 2 game. So if he actually does go, I think, if I get word that he is playing, then I'm shopping AFC North prices for every other team and trying to just, get a relatively high Bengals no in pocket, because I don't think it's likely that he makes it through a season healthy if he continues to push himself week in, week out. And ultimately, I think it'll get to the point where he misses the rest of the season. The flip side of the coin is if he passes, if he decides, hey, I'm going to give us a couple weeks to get fully right here before I go out there and play again, get my lower body strength back up, and get my mechanics and my throwing where it needs to be to run an NFL offense, then all of a sudden I think the Bengals probably have an opportunity to kind of course correct on their season. But if he's ruled out and this moves to Bengals, as 2.5, 3-point dogs, I would give a consideration to betting the Bengals at that point, that maybe there's a little bit of a market overreaction. And if he plays, I think this is still very much a bet against the Bengals, because it's going to take, in my opinion, middle of October, end of October, before you see him with enough separation between the injury and being on the field at NFL speed to be able to play the way we know Joe Burrow can play. I'm hopeful his camp, and I'm hopeful the trainers, I'm hopeful that all parties involved are operating with cool heads and kind of looking at the long term here, and not like trying to just be like, well, we just paid him, he needs to go out there and play. Like that type of thinking, I think, is wildly detrimental to this season and his long-term health and ability to actually earn that money. And so I'm hopeful that ultimately the Bengals put him on ice, give him 2-3 weeks, and no one in the AFC is running away from you. No one in the AFC North is good. Even the 2-0 Ravens, I have huge questions about what's going on there. And the injuries surrounding that squad are just like all impactful. And so I could see a scenario where the Bengals at 1-4, 2-3 are very much not out of the AFC North. And so, obviously me saying this on the Matchbook pod is not going to get through to anybody in the Cincinnati headquarters. But I think, I'm very hopeful that they kind of recognize he's hurt. He's not right. And putting him out there risks him having a season-ending injury. I think almost certainly the injury we saw when everybody kind of freaked out and they were like, "Oh, Achilles," that was a grade 2 sprain. That needed 6 to 8 weeks to heal, and they put him back out at the very, very front end of that. And I think you're seeing the consequences now in the way he's playing out there.
If it's any consolation, Drew, you made a good case, and I completely agree. They need to give him a couple of weeks off to give Bengals any chance of a long playoff run. Judah, you mentioned it's a great handicap, a little bit on the Rams, who have been a surprise package, I guess. Really put it up to the Niners last week. There's been debates on Twitter if this is sustainable or not. Is it for you? And I know it's ultimately a no bet, but what is your thoughts on this handicap?
Yeah, I think you kind of framed it perfectly, which is the name of the game at this point of the season is like, how do you price what we've seen with our off-season priors? And I'm much more comfortable to kind of lean into Stafford and McVay being good, because we have a sample of them from the past playing well with like Jared Goff. I mean, like Robert Woods wasn't a great receiver until he kind of came into Los Angeles. Like Puka Nacua has been good. Tutu Atwell has been an analytics darling by most of my numbers. I'm much more comfortable to lean into something that is like tried and true. We know McVay and Stafford can have success together, and all signs point to them at least being a lot better than we initially anticipated. So I'm more than happy to kind of look into the Rams side here. The issue I have with the Bengals is twofold. Number one, they basically just play 11 personnel, which they've got 3 wide receivers out there. They're putting their best guys out on the field, but defenses have kind of learned to counter that. And towards the end of last season, Mike McDonald, the Ravens defensive coordinator, kind of laid out the blueprint of how to stop this offense. And since that point, they have not been good on offense. I'm a little bit concerned that kind of the league has caught up to how they want to play their offense. They have not been a particularly creative offense. If you look at things like perfect coverage, how often they kind of force coverage mistakes from the other team, they've never graded out well in those areas. I'd be a little bit concerned that kind of the success we've seen of the Bengals, the defenses are going to adjust. And then obviously the injury is the huge thing here. I track something what I call true scrambles, which is essentially anytime a quarterback begins the process of scrambling. Usually scrambles are defined by whether they cross the line of scrimmage or not. It will be a sack if you don't, and it will be a scramble if you do. But this includes things like throwing on the run, when you kind of have this option of like, should I pass, should I run? And then like sacks are also intertwined there. And Joe Burrow, when passing, was by far the best quarterback in the NFL the past couple of years. That's really where he's at his best, is kind of eluding the pressure and throwing on the run. And he has not been good in that metric so far this season. And I think that's, every bit a part of the calf injury. If he loses that part of his game, that's absolutely huge. Especially when we talk about the lack of the Bengals' seam creativity. His ability to create on his own, to extend plays and find open receivers is so essential to the Bengals' success that injury is magnified. I'm going to go here, jump into some of our long shot plays. And that's the Rams minus 9.5. I like this basically of all of the theses I've just outlined. really, I don't want to bet the median projection, right? I don't want to bet the actual spread of this game. But if it is true that the Rams are, an offense that put up 20 to 23 points against the Niners, we can talk about that field goal and how that worked. It absolutely dominated the Seahawks. And if this is a legit offense and the Bengals are as bad as they've shown, I want to take that 9.5 because the market's not pressing in kind of that possibility. And would it be totally shocking to us if we look back and say, the Rams went, 11-6 with a really, really good offense because they have. We're talking about how great Sean McVay is. We're talking about him and the Coach of the Year possibility, and they've got some legit receivers. And we're like, remember when the Bengals were so bad because Joe Burrow was really hurt and this offense couldn't get anything going? I want to capitalize on that angle. And I like the Rams at 9.5, not betting the median, but betting the possibility that actually the Rams are a lot better than we think. And the Bengals at this point in time are just not that good because this injury is really clearly affecting Joe Burrow.
Okay, first long shot rounds minus 9.5 at Bengals, 5.0 currently. Very exciting. This is our new segment, best week 3 long shots. Judah, sorry, I never mentioned if I had my own takeaways from week 2, it would have been that Rams field goal at the end. I don't think I've ever seen anything like that in my life, and I'd actually temporarily forgotten about it till you mentioned it. And a sudden shudder came over me again as it denied a couple of my parlays or accumulators, as we call them here in the UK and Ireland. But we're moving swiftly on. Drew, we'll stick with best 3 long shots and go to you on this one. The money line, you're liking the Colts here.
Yeah, and I'm not expecting Anthony Richardson to go. I get it. But if he does, that'd be great.
He's out.
He's out for sure.
That just came out.
It just came out. Okay. Well, they're a real long shot now. No, but I think I like. This is a bet on Shane Steichen. I just in general like the way he's approaching his first year as a head coach. I like the familiarity that Minshew brings as a backup with his particular style of offense, and I think in general the Colts defense was their prior preseason was probably wrong. I think this is a better pass defense than I realized. I don't exactly know how Gus Bradley is coaching up these relative no names in the secondary to perform somewhat well. I mean, they went up against a Jags team that had an all-universe set of weapons and at times got exposed, but in hindsight that was actually probably a pretty good performance, and then they were outstanding against a Texans team that doesn't really have a ton of game breakers, and now you bring in a Ravens team that doesn't have a ton of game breakers. I mean, the second highest EPA per target last week was Nelson Aguilar. This is surprising that he was their highest EPA per play target in the passing game last week, even more than Mark Andrews. So go figure. But I realistically am just not impressed so far with what I'm seeing from the Todd Monken, offensive approach. In general, the Ravens, I think, are getting by with having played, a couple of games where things were wildly in their favor. Going up against a rookie quarterback in his first start on the road is pretty advantageous. And then getting an injured Joe Burrow in a spot where the world and the pressure is on him to bounce back, and he's not fully physically fit, I think is pretty obvious. And so the Ravens defense, I think, can be tested. They don't really have any pass rush to speak of. The injuries across that defensive entire roster are unbelievable. They're already down to running back 2 and 3, and in general, I think Lamar is a player that I would like to see more from in this offensive system. And so this is basically just saying I don't think the Ravens can run away and hide here. And if Steichen gets anything out of Gardner Minshew in this game, then I think the Colts are relatively live. And this is maybe a tease for what I think the best bet of the board is this week.
Okay, a comment here saying Richardson hasn't been ruled out officially. He's mixing practice today. So yeah, maybe there is a bit more value there. Judah.
He's out. If you don't practice in this concussion protocol on Wednesday, you're ruled out.
Judah, thanks for that update. All over the concussion protocols there, Judah. We will go to Sam. Sam, you've got a underdog here, the Titans money line, and then you've got a few any other bets as well.
Yeah, so in terms of the long shot, I'm taking the Titans on the money line. Judah talked very briefly about the Browns defense, and they have been absolutely sensational. But this is less a bet against them. This is a bet against two things: against the Browns having the mentality to bounce back after that horrible injury, and against the offense that has looked anemic at times, particularly in the passing offense. So first of all, I mean, we kind of talked about it, what we kind of thought and what we felt when we saw that Nick Chubb injury. And I think that is going to have a real impact upon his teammates. I think it's a real kind of sink or swim thing for them. I think they're either going to react really well or they're going to fold slightly. We're going to see more Jerome Ford. They've just signed Kareem Hunt. So we're going to see a bit of him sprinkled in, I imagine, as well. But I think it will be predominantly Ford. And I don't know. I think they're going to have to lean on that group of running backs because Deshaun Watson has stunk the place out so far. He has been absolutely dreadful. So for me, I look at this Titans team, and one thing they do have, as proved by that win over the Chargers, is they have mentality. And I think this is going to be one of those, I think it's got the second lowest total of the week, 38.5. This is going to be one of those horrible, horrible games. It's not going to be fun to watch. It's going to be low scoring. It's going to be a grinding victory. But I think we're going to see the Titans just about do it and get over the line.
I desperately need some fun injected into this season, and Jeffrey Simmons knocking Deshaun Watson out and having DTR come in and save the day for the Browns is probably the only thing that I'm not cheering for that, Sam. But just don't let that ruin your Sunday if that happens, because we need Watson now and we need DTR in some way, shape, or form. And I think an injury is probably the only way we're getting it.
The Titans locked in money line 2.5 for Sam. And stick with you, Sam. You've got any other week 3 bets. Start with the Packers, because when you're watching Red Zone, this was one game that I nearly missed. The Packers ended up losing until watching checking the scores after, just because it was just such a quarter 4 comeback. You do like the -3 against the Saints, 2.22 currently on Match.
Yeah, I think the Saints, to be fair, have actually impressed me this year, and they're a little better than I anticipated they would be. But the Packers, sure, they're 1-1, but they did blow that opportunity against the Falcons. They should have won that. I've spoke about him, I think, every week so far, but I have been hugely impressed by Jordan Love. I really have been exceptional. I think the key thing here is he's likely to have one, if not both, of Aaron Jones and Christian Watson back. That's 2 big weapons for that offense that are really going to help out. And I think Aaron Jones in particular could be really good for him. Obviously, a short week for the Saints. That's going to kind of play into this. And this is obviously, I believe, the first start for Jordan Love at Lambeau. So I just think of this -3. I really like that. I'm going to take that all over the place. If it goes any bigger, I'll take that as well. A few other ones I've got that I'm going to go through very quickly. Cowboys to cover. I think it's 12.5 points against the Cardinals. And I know we spoke about earlier on, the Cardinals aren't potentially as bad as we anticipated, but yeah, they played the Commanders, they played the Giants. Those are decent defenses. They're not awful. They are about to play the Cowboys defense, who this is a defense that can make an ordinary team, let alone a bad team, lose heavily. So I'm taking them on for that reason, even though I generally don't like to bet on spreads above double digits where possible. And finally, Lions. I've got 2.5. As much as I've enjoyed watching so far this season, I just still look at the Falcons and I don't really trust them. I certainly don't trust Desmond Ridder, and he's 0-2 as a starter on the road. They're going to be in Detroit. I just don't want any part of this. So I'm going to take the Lions 2.5. And I'm going to feel pretty good about that, I think.
Okay, nice one there. Lions -2.5 versus the Falcons, Packers -3 versus Saints, and Cowboys -12.5 at the Cardinals. Drew, you have any other bet here on the Patriots?
Yeah, I think the Patriots are close to figuring it out, and I like this matchup against the Jets because the Jets' offensive line, I'm ready to see really get abused in this one. And I think the Patriots' offensive line was kind of the key problem in not really getting their offense going against the Dolphins. It looks to me like Trent Brown is going to be back, which is a big important piece for what has otherwise been a pretty weak unit. I think there were some signs of life in some of the things that they were asking Mac Jones to do, to where it wasn't just, oh, this is the guy from his rookie year who can play quarterback. It was like, oh, this guy is actually growing a bit and adding a little bit to his arsenal, particularly when they had him on the move. I thought it looked like NFL stuff, and that's positive. as positive as it can be, I guess. And then the flip side of the coin, the Jets offense and some of the grumbling that I'm already hearing from some of the players who, expected to be on a Super Bowl contending team and were pretty embarrassed last week. That doesn't, that there seems to be some fractures in terms of just, how that locker room is, playing in Aaron Rodgers' absence. And, it's if you want to boil this down to just, the narrative handicap of the week, then you get to bet on Bill Belichick against Zach Wilson under a field goal. You got to do it. So let's go Pats.
Yeah, sometimes it's as simple as that last line, Bill Belichick against Zach Wilson. Drew, stick with you for your best bet, and it's linked to your long shot there. So you're taking the Colts +8.
Yeah. So again, some of this is I don't think Gardner Minshew is bad as this rating would say. I don't think the Ravens are good enough to be 8-point favorites against a Colts team that should have been upgraded in terms of defense based on what you've seen so far this season. And I think that the offensive line for the Colts is probably worth adding to this handicap beyond what we were talking about in terms of value on the money line. I think this, the protection that they're providing is so much better than what they had on the field last year. That really kind of unraveled things from Jump Street on any given set of downs, and I think that matters. I think this is a Colts team that can win an ugly game 23-20-ish. And definitely stay inside an 8, even if they can't ultimately get the win. So Colts +8, best bet for me this week.
Okay, 194 currently on Matchbook. Judah, we'll go to you for best bet, and you're taking on Sam and the Packers with the Saints, and you're taking them on the money line.
Yeah, this is not the highest conviction best bet, but so it goes. You got to have something. I think the Packers are a little bit fraudulent in their success. They have certainly by any advanced metrics they're going to pop, but I think that's mostly off the backs of a bunch of explosive plays. And they also haven't played an NFL caliber defense. I'm not at all buying the Falcons D as being any good. They have some of the lowest success rates in the league. Granted, Matt LaFleur is a terrific coach. And if you kind of look at any situation metric, whether it's perfect coverage or rates of open receivers, things of that sort, that kind of scheme has a lot of influence. The Packers are going to show up high, but I think that takes a little bit of a hit when you face the Saints defense, who in the long run, because they are such an old defense, they're very fragile, but right now their guys are healthy and they are producing not the best pass rush, but the secondary has been terrific. Marshawn Lattimore has really bounced back, at least early in the season. It doesn't really matter to me that maybe Aaron Jones helps on the margins. Christian Watson's back. They've already kind of gotten that explosive success that I don't think is going to sustain itself. I'm not too worried about adding Christian Watson. I think that's already bound to regress. If you look at any of the success rates, the Packers have just been kind of a middling to bottom team and not this sort of top team. On the Saints side, I think the key to this game is the Saints run the ball way too much for their own good. At some of the highest pass rates above expected. That changed in the second half of this game when Jamal Williams went down. I do not expect him to be playing. Alvin Kamara is still suspended. I don't think they're comfortable giving Tony Jones a ton of work or Kendre Miller if he's even back healthy. And I think that's going to tilt the Saints to the pass. And these weapons are absolutely amazing. I mean, Mike Thomas has just come in and as if he wasn't hurt for 3 years. It's been terrific. Chris Olave is blossoming into one of the best receivers in the league, and I think Rashid Shaheed is the most underrated receiver in the league. If you look at his separation numbers, he's second best. If you look at his, what I call post throw, so how good you are at the catch point and after the catch point, he's top 5. If you look at him on deep plays, he's top 10. The guy's absolutely amazing, and I think we're going to see the Saints airing it out a bunch, and the Packers D will not be able to stop the Saints offense. I mean, backing Derek Carr feels a little gross, but I think the context and surroundings, the Saints offensive line has been dreadful. I expect them to get a little bit better, just regressing to kind of the averages we've seen over the past couple of years. And I think this is just a huge mismatch because I don't think Jordan Love's a particularly good quarterback. I think he's being propped up kind of by schemes and advantageous matchups early. And I think that if we see the Saints turn to the air as they should, with a bunch of injuries and suspension to their running backs, I don't think the Packers are going to be able to stop the Saints aerial attack, which is really primarily led by their weapons.
Okay, Saints money line 2.16. Sam and Judah going head to head there. But Sam, take it away with your best bet. It's the Jags team we haven't spoken about so far today, -9 against the Texans.
Yeah, well, obviously, kind of before we were recording this, Drew was on the injury report. We didn't know if he was going to show up, and I thought if if Drew's not here to talk about the Jags, somebody's got to do it. So, Jags -9. I love this line. At home to the Texans, big divisional clash. I just think this team, I know it's a really disappointing game the other day against the Chiefs, but Lawrence went 0 for 7 in red zone. Let's be honest, that's very, very likelihood of happening again. I think we're going to see them be more efficient. So that's one thing that's kind of really boosting me ahead of this game. Defensively, I've actually been really impressed by Jacksonville for the most part this season. Ranked 8th at the moment in defensive DVOA. Really good special teams as well. And ultimately, with the Texans, I'm not totally sold on the offensive line. I think CJ Stroud has looked really, really good in parts and has shown some big plays. But ultimately, this is a team that the Jags, I think, are starting to kind of get that air of a team who know how to win, know how to get things done. I think they're going to cover quite easily, if I'm honest, at home to the Texans here.
Who are the Jaguars? I've never heard of them. Jaguars? There's an NFL team called the Jaguars?
Well,
Weird.
here's your start of the day on the Jaguars. In the last 15 years of Sunday Night Football, does anyone know how many times the Jags have been shown?
Oh, it's got to be at least one, right?
There's someone I might have seen the tweet.
Zero
times, which I was shocked at. Fascinating. Fascinating there. I might tweet it out, quote tweet it there if you want to check it out. But yeah, we're done. Colts +8, Jags -9, and New Orleans money line are the 3 best bets. And recap of all the bets there. I know a lot of people asked for that. Will be available on Matchbook Insights from Thursday morning. So if you are betting on Red Zone or anything like that, do check it out. A lot of bets thrown at you there. But we really appreciate everyone listening. Do head over to our YouTube channel. Check out that £50 free bet competition. But until then, Sam, Judah, Drew, thanks very much. We will be back next week, same time, same place. Good luck.